Hello. Hello, hello. Yep, live on Twitch and live on YouTube. Cool. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to start right now, checks on when it's scheduled for. But yes, hello everyone. We had a stream yesterday, Twitch exclusive. It was pretty good, I think. Definitely on the way to get monetized over there, so that should be good. The XP system, it's basically... Why? I don't even have a chat window on this webcam, that's why. Yeah, so the XP, I think you just, like, if you donate money, it gives you a bunch of XP. If you, like, message actively, it gives you XP. You should put the cam close to your face. Well, unfortunately, it's not on an arm. It's just sat on my monitor, so not possible. But yeah. They were... Oop, this is still the wrong location from yesterday. Back B. Gotta click through so many things. Yeah, so we're doing this debate with Gene Epstein and David Friedman on the non-aggression principle. This was suggested to me by a Ko-fi donator. So yeah, it should be pretty good. Obviously, I've got a video on David Friedman. Well, I don't think that he is an anarcho-capitalist, and we will see, supposedly, his defense of his position in this debate of why the non-aggression principle is bad. They, I mean, I suppose they'll go into it, so we can just get started.
And the proposition reads, the right way to persuade people of libertarianism is by showing them that its outcomes are superior without any resort to the flawed non-aggression principle.
Okay, so the right way to persuade people, okay, so the standard is what persuades people of libertarianism, though. So it depends on what libertarianism actually is. And what libertarianism is apparently something which has superior outcomes by just anybody's standards. And you don't have, and the non-aggression principle is flawed. Okay, so this is already, Friedman has a very flawed position here, a very problematic position, because, okay, so he doesn't have a non-aggression principle. So he can't use the non-aggression principle to show that a system is superior. Okay, so what is he using instead of the non-aggression principle to say, hey, this is a good system and this is a bad system? He's not using the non-aggression principle. What is he using? Well, he's using just their standards. Just any old person, just anybody on the street, whatever standards they happen to have, he tries to mold and fit libertarianism to fit their standards. This is a deeply parasitic way of doing ethics. Right? He isn't actually providing any sort of ethical theory, so I don't know how he can say that this is the right way to do anything, because right way, that means that you're talking about ethics, so this is the correct way to do it. This is the just thing to do, this is the good thing to do. But he's just adopting whatever he's just parasitizing on whatever standard somebody already has. So this isn't actually an ethical theory at all, it's just, oh, whatever ethics you have, well actually libertarianism means that. But then libertarianism, what is the definition of libertarianism? It's just whatever you happen to already believe. So then libertarianism it lacks identity. So, you know, if Epstein is able to point these things out, and hopefully he is, then pretty much David Friedman has nowhere to go. Why are there so many ads? There shouldn't be too many. I don't know. I just have it on automatic. Yeah, so I really want to see Gene Epstein pointing out some of these philosophical flaws. I don't know if he will. I don't really know what Gene Epstein's philosophy is, besides from just being a libertarian, but of course that's just floating up in space. That's not full-on philosophy. So we'll see. Zero aggression principle, okay.
The right way to persuade people of libertarianism is by showing them that its outcomes are superior.
Isn't Friedman a utilitarian? I mean, it's very possible. Because, I mean, again, this is a deeply parasitic position he's taking. And utilitarianism is itself parasitic. It is saying that you want to maximize utility. You want to maximize the greatest good for the greatest number, right? And that's kind of the utilitarian maxim. Okay, but what does it mean for something to be good? It means that it's, there are a bunch of different types of utilitarians, and they all try and get their own way at this. But really what it is saying, well, it gives you good things. It gives you valuable things. Okay, however you want to define a thing being valuable. Let's say, money, right? It's like, okay, well, if you want to maximize, I like money, and so I want to, if I get a bunch of money, and somebody only, gets, touched on the finger, right, and it just brushes by them, and that generates $1 billion for me, most utilitarians would say that that's a very good thing. Okay, but why is money good? Right, because I value it. But why do I value money? Well, I value money because it's able to get me things that I more fundamentally value. Okay, but then I had to already value those more fundamental things, and so I had a code of values. What is a code of values? Well, that's given by your ethics. So you need to already have ethics before some ethical system before you can have utilitarianism. It's parasitic. It requires some antecedent ethical system. You can't be a utilitarian from the get-go. And based on this resolution, you can't be a David Friedmanite from the get-go either, because it's parasitizing on other people's standards. It takes their standards as given. He's not providing an ethical system, which he should be.
Without any resort to the flawed non-aggression principle, the flawed principle. You see how that adjective is underlined. And
people value anything because it brings them pleasure and or avoids pain. But why? Why do I have pleasure from these things? I have pleasure from these things because I think that they're good, right? These sensations, that's not the be all and end all. It's happiness, right? Happiness isn't just reducible to, dopamine receptors going off, because, I find it very pleasurable. I get a lot of dopamine in my brain when I see $100 bill on the ground and I pick it up. Why is that? Right? It's if a dog came along and saw that same $100 bill, would the dog also go, "Oh, goody"? No, you wouldn't, because the dog doesn't have values in the same way.
Two 78-year-old libertarians discussing it, double that. You get 156 years of libertarian wisdom grappling with that issue. So this could be your lucky day. I now give the podium over to Dennis Pratt, moderator.
Thanks a lot, Gene. In Yiddish, there are twice the number of words for argument than for happy. And so therefore, here on the great Porcupine Freedom stage, for your entertainment, we bring to you together two great Jewish mentions, kvetching for your entertainment. The resolution, the right way to persuade people of libertarianism is by showing them their standards, aggression, affirmative. Anonymous, legal scholar, 49 state of California, weighed in at 78-year communist, Friedman.
There we go, finally.
How you doing? Let's take a seat. And members, the sub.
Let's just get into the fucking arguments already. There we go.
I am going to be making two different arguments. Sorry, is this turned on? Yeah. I don't really need a mic in a room this small. There are two different arguments I have to make. The first is to show what is wrong with the NAP.
Okay, so he's making some sort of factual claim. Maybe not even. Maybe he's not even going into ethics. Maybe he's being some sort of anti-realist here. It's like, oh, you can't ever have any ethical truths at all. Well, then he's going to have trouble showing that the right way to do anything is anything if there are no ethical truths. So he's really got to have some sort of competing ethical system here. So that the NAP is actually immoral in some way, that there's some superior principles, so then he's going to fall down into either some sort of mixed law system or the jungle ethic, which is just do whatever the fuck you want, who cares? Whim worship, right? But ultimately, all of it descends into whim worship, and it all descends into the primacy of consciousness, right? So these are real problems that David Friedman will have to tackle. And if he just goes pure skeptic, says that there are no moral truths, well, then he can't say that it's the right way to persuade people. Because what do you mean right way? Is there a wrong way or right way when you don't have any normative any ethics at all? Like, how could there be a right way or a wrong way to do things? Because clearly they're both capable of convincing people, you know, of libertarianism, whatever libertarianism is, because again, we need to discuss what libertarianism is. You know, people have been convinced of libertarianism by me, and I'm using this flawed non-aggression principle, so it's not that it just fails to convince anybody, ever. And in my view, it actually is the only thing which can convince people of libertarianism. So showing what the first argument being showing what the flaw is with the non-aggression principle. Okay. But then he's also got to show that presumably the second argument is showing that his way is the right way to persuade people of libertarianism. That's, you know, he's got a few arguments in there, actually.
The second is to show why you do not need the NAP to argue for libertarianism. The NAP, as I understand it and as it's usually presented, is an absolute rule. What it says is you should never initiate coercion. As best
I mean, sure, that's, some people will use it in that way. I don't think that's the best way to define it at all. There's this article by Kinsella. Let's see here. It's going to pop out. Yeah, Stephen Kinsella, the problem with coercion. It's like really... Why is this not letting me fucking click? That's because it's this. Goddamn Wayland. Yeah, I mean, just you can look up this article. It's coercion just means like physically be forcing someone to do something. That's a alright definition as far as the stream is concerned, I think. But like we are fine with forcing people to do things. It's the same problem with force, right? We're absolutely fine to force criminals to stop, you know, shooting up a school. We're absolutely fine with that. We're absolutely fine coercing them to prevent them from continuing their actions. Really, it should be defined in terms of conflict. So the non-aggression principle says don't commit aggression, which means do not initiate conflicts with anybody. Yeah.
I can tell, nobody, including no libertarian, actually believes in it. And my stand...
Well, hey, found one right here. Who's got 2 thumbs and wouldn't steal the candy bar? This guy.
Standard example of that, which was invented by the late Bill Bradford, who was the founder and editor of Liberty Magazine, is to imagine that you manage to fall off your 10th floor balcony, by good luck catch hold of the flagpole of the 9th floor balcony, and are working your way hand over hand on back to the balcony when the owner of the apartment comes out and says, you do not have my permission to use my flagpole. How many people here, raise your hand if you would let go?
Yeah, so there are a few ways to, I mean, this isn't the, you know, people have refined these types of scenarios, these reductios quite a bit at this point. This is not a very refined version. Obviously, he's taking it from some dead guy at this point. So there are a few ways to deal with this flagpole situation. The first is like, okay, it first of all, it just isn't an argument, right? Saying, hey, you're inconsistent. Sure, that's an argument against that specific person, but it's not actually an argument against NEP absolutism. All it does is show that they're not an NEP absolutist. So if someone bites the bullet and says that they would let go, well, you haven't actually given an argument against them. You haven't proven that... does anyone know what extension Zulu uses for YouTube? I don't know what you're referring to. So in the first level, it's just not an argument. It's a reductio ad absurdum. You need to then have a further argument why NEP absolutism is in fact wrong. There are also other ways to tackle this. First of all, you know, it's an ethical cold open. How the fuck did I get here? Right, this is a problem that I point out in my video, Anarcho-Capitalism Responding to the Critics. It's an ethical cold open, so it's actually just invalid on those grounds, right? Ethics doesn't answer, okay, snapshot, we're in, you're falling. It's like, whoa, hold on, how did I get to be falling? Was I just like kind of bounding around on the roof, not really caring about life at all? It's like, oh, slippery floor, you see, let's run at that, you know? And then I slipped off and it's like, whoa, now I need someone else to help me. Then yeah, indeed, I've got myself in that fucking conundrum, and this flagpole owner is allowed to start shooting at me to get me off the flagpole. That's absolutely fine. That's why you need more context from beforehand to really answer it, and you can't really get that much context. That's sort of a problem with a lot of reductions ad absurdum. But also, I mean, another way to sort of think about this is, I believe I got this modification from my friend Idlework, where you say, well, instead of a flagpole, what if it's my giant swinging penis drooping over the edge, right? And someone comes and grabs on my penis, and I'm like, you know, it's you know, causing me great physical pain. Me as the person with the giant swinging penis, would I be allowed to swing them off to stop them from, you know, potentially ripping my giant impressive penis off? Right? Why are we answering it from their perspective? Why do you have the right necessarily to be climbing up my penis? That seems untoward to me. Or the other way to do this, I believe Casimir came up with this, which is, okay, we've got this thing called gentleness. So if I'm on this flagpole, and you say, hey, I want you off my property, is the gentlest way to get that person off the property really to have them let go? I mean, that is one way to do it. That is one way to get them off your property. But is it the gentlest way? Well, we don't have enough to, obviously we don't have a specific example in front of us, so we can't necessarily answer that. But well, we can still kind of answer this. Well, if it's a normal type of building, in normal circumstances, probably the gentlest way is to say, hey, doors over there, get out of here, right? Now, obviously, you can keep adding caveats on here to try and change which the gentlest way is, but that is the fundamental point, is that gentleness does have to be incorporated here. You do have to consider gentleness. Like, the NAP doesn't say anything about, in fact, it implies the opposite of, you can just use arbitrary means to stop trespass. The NAP says nothing about like that. The NAP says you have to use the gentlest means possible, or else you're in fact initiating conflict. Right? If I'm escorting a person out, but as I'm escorting them out, I start stabbing them in the side. Well, that stabbing in the side, that's not actually doing anything to defend my property. The escorting out was already defending my property, right? So the stabbing is just a new aggression, and they in fact are allowed to defend their property, their body, from my stabbing. So there are a lot of ways to sort of deal with this scenario. It's not the be all end all that Friedman's expression would seemingly indicate that it is.
All right, I think that confirms my claim that nobody actually believes in the NAP as it is normally stated.
Again, no, it doesn't confirm your claim. I mean, maybe because he's using this retarded definition of the NAP where it says never use coercion ever. If that's really the definition, then the guy is allowed to just kind of stay on the ladder, because you're not allowed to use coercion to get him off. So this doesn't actually establish what Friedman thinks it establishes. And also all it would establish is that nobody in that room would let go. But does that prove, first, does it prove that nobody in that room is an NAP absolutist? They might be an NAP absolutist, but they have these counters that I just went over in their head. That's very possible. Or maybe nobody in that room is an NAP absolutist, but that doesn't prove that nobody is an NAP absolutist. If I went into the Democratic Socialists of America conference, and I stepped up to the mic and I said, hey, here's a scenario. There's a man who fires a worker because the worker wasn't working hard enough, and this guy wanted the worker to work really, really hard, and he fires this worker. Would anybody here care that this worker took some money on the way out? And they're all like, no, of course not. Of course not. That's great. It's like, see, nobody believes in the NAP. Nobody believes in property rights. It's like, well, hold on. You've got a bit of a selection bias there.
A less extreme example that I've sometimes used is to imagine that there is a madman with a rifle shooting at a crowd of people. It just happens there is a rifle close to you that you could use to kill him. Unfortunately, it belongs to somebody who has publicly announced that he never wants anybody else to use his rifle. Using his rifle to kill the killer is a violation of his property rights. It is forbidden by the NAP. I won't poll people this time, but my guess is that most of you would...
Again, so... yeah, you have to question, first of all, how did I get in this situation? Why am I not carrying? Have I been irresponsible going into this area and just expecting somebody else to have a rifle? Well, and then I've done some sort of negligence there. I've been in some way negligent. So there are all sorts of ways to go over this. I mean, it's the same sort of rebuttals as I just already went over. So, and again, still doesn't prove anything, right? This is just a reduction ad absurdum. At most, it could prove that the audience is inconsistent. At most, it could do that. But that isn't actually an argument. He needs to have an argument as to why the NAP is flawed. That's what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to have an argument as to why the NAP is flawed, but nobody believes in it. That's not an argument towards its invalidity, right? There was a time where nobody believed that contradictions were false. There was a time where no serious philosopher believed that contradictions were false until Parmenides came around and he said, no, the contradictions are indeed false. Heraclitus, he was the big guy, right? And you know, maybe I'm getting my history a little bit wrong there. Maybe there were other contemporaries who disagreed. But imagine it were the case. Imagine it were the case that literally nobody believed that contradictions were false. Would that imply that contradictions are true? Well, then you just got primacy of the social consciousness. That nobody agrees with the NAP is being used as proof that the NAP is false. But that's not how it works.
Would be in favor of grabbing the rifle. There are two ways I've seen of trying to evade the conclusion that the NAP, although a very useful rule of thumb, is not the kind of absolute principle that libertarians routinely claim it is. One of them is to say that the real objective is not to never violate rights or to never initiate coercion, but to minimize the violation of rights. So you could then say that in the...
Well, again, so now he's just kind of plowing on as if he's already showed the flaw in the non-aggression principle. It's like, okay, well, maybe they try and save it by saying we're minimized, but he hasn't actually showed the flaw in the non-aggression principle. So he's just plowing forth, acting as if he has indeed disproven the non-aggression principle, but he hasn't. So we're going straight into mixed law now without having actually dealt with the non-aggression principle case.
Case of the mass killer, when you seize a rifle, that's a much smaller violation of rights than what you're stopping, and therefore you're entitled to do it. The problem with that is that if that's your position, you no longer have an adequate argument for libertarian conclusions. Because now the people who disagree with you will say, well, yes, indeed, taxation is a violation of your property rights, but we need the money in order to pay police and soldiers to prevent people from being coerced by criminals in foreign countries. So,
yeah, indeed, if you let aggression in through the sally port, indeed, it opens up the door to all sorts of aggression, but David Friedman, you do the exact same thing. You also allow aggression through the sally port. You allow for, on the market, all sorts of violations of people's rights to arise, because he thinks rights arise on the market. He doesn't think there's an objective thing to rights. He thinks they come about on the market, but there's a reason why I'm using the scare quotes all the time. What does it mean for something to arise on the market? What does that mean? What does that mean? What is the market? Well, we're not using the non-aggression principle anymore because the non-aggression principle is flawed. So he can't just do what Rothbarding would do to say, hey, this is an unhampered market because there is no aggression. Easy, done. It's like that gymnastics meme, right? That's very easy. But David Friedman, he doesn't have the non-aggression principle. So how does he identify the market as against not the market? How does he know that the current situation we're in didn't arise on the market? How does he show this? I have heard zero Friedmanites ever tackle this question properly. I've never seen it. Maybe it's somewhere, but I've never seen this being tackled by any Friedmanite ever. Will you do a stream reacting to Jubilee capitalism versus socialism with Ben and Monhop? That's the plan. We're setting something up.
So you are then thrown back on an essentially consequentialist argument, on trying to argue that you can successfully protect rights without government taxation. The NAP no longer buys you anything once you turn it from a statement of what you may do to what you want to minimize. A different way in which I've seen people try to deal with this problem is to say that it's all right to violate rights as long as you compensate the victim. Now, to begin with, that means that you now approve of eminent domain as it is currently used by the government, because eminent domain consists.
Yeah, indeed, I completely agree with this argument that, oh, I'll just violate your rights and then I compensate the victim after. I very much like also, I've not heard this example before, of, well, that proves that eminent domain is fine because you compensate the victim. I love that example, and I'm definitely going to be using it. Now, I mean, some people could maneuver their way around by saying, well, actually, the proper restitution would be giving them their property back. It wouldn't be giving them just some arbitrary amount of money. So yeah, there are ways to get around that. But even still, okay, let's say I'm going to describe for you right now a perfectly 100% NAP compliant world. Okay, what it is every person in the world decided they wanted to agree with Adolf Hitler, but they'd all been convinced previously that the NAP is an absolute. It's terrible to violate it unless it's all criminal, right? They completely agree with this sort of legal theory, but they also really liked Hitler's idea, so they want to kill all the Jews. So what they say is, okay, right, I'm just going to go over and kill that Jew. It's like, but it's okay because I'm going to accept the punishment. I will accept the punishment when it comes. And then some Jewish person comes up. It's like, well, I'm gonna punish you. I'm gonna enact retribution against you, eye for an eye. And he starts pulling out his gun, and then he shoots him again. It's like, okay, yes, now I've killed 2 Jews, but I'll accept my punishment. I will accept my punishment. If anybody comes up and tries to punish me, I will accept my punishment. You know, more people keep coming up, and they're like, okay, well, we're gonna punish you. Now it's like, okay, well, don't worry, I will accept my punishment, but I'm just gonna do a new crime, which is resisting my punishment. And shoots all them. It's like, okay, I did that new crime. That is true, but I'll accept my punishment for that. Don't worry, I'll accept my punishment. And he goes on over right up until the end of his life, and right as he's on his deathbed, it's like, okay, I accept my punishment. He expires. It's like, okay, don't worry, because that was all NAP compliant. He didn't do anything untoward by libertarian norms there, because he accepted his punishment. So it's all okay now, right? But the point is, which this sort of reductio kind of highlights, is that you accepted the punishment, that you had the punishment happen, that doesn't make it right that it happened in the first place. Okay? If I commit a crime and then I'm punished for that, the punishment doesn't undo the crime. The crime happened. It was bad that it happened. Okay? And really, if you think that it is, and this is kind of against all those virtuous crime type people, where it's like, okay, right, I'm going to do a crime, but it's a virtuous crime. It's a good crime. It's a good for me to do this crime. But I'll just accept the punishment afterwards. So it's all okay. Well, if you really think that it's good to do that thing, you shouldn't be arguing, but then I'll just accept the punishment. It's okay. You should be arguing, okay, so there should be no punishment here. There shouldn't be a punishment because I was right to do this. I was right to kill that guy. I was right to steal that sandwich to feed my family. I was right to do these things, so I should not be punished. If you accept a punishment, then you're kind of admitting that what you did was wrong. But to do something wrong, that means that you shouldn't be doing that thing, right? Or else there shouldn't be a punishment. So the virtuous, indeed Friedman is entirely correct. There is this virtuous crime argument where I'll just accept the punishment, it's fine. That is indeed nonsense. It doesn't work. But again, Friedman has not yet attacked the non-aggression principle yet. He hasn't actually shown why the non-aggression principle is wrong. And I believe that Gene Epstein actually accepts the virtuous crime argument, so he isn't an NAP absolutist, so I really don't think we're going to get a proper defense of the non-aggression principle here. I think that he's just going to be able to flow through on that, which is very disappointing.
This of seizing property and then paying what is claimed to be a fair compensation for it. More generally, how do you decide what a fair compensation is? And I think the instinct of most libertarians would be what the owner of the property is willing to accept. But the owner of the property might not be willing to accept any payment that you can make. He might not be willing to accept any payment at all. So I think neither of those solves the fundamental problem, which is that the NAP itself is a position that nobody really believes in. It's good for rhetoric.
Again, nobody really believes it. Okay, we need one counterexample. Here I am. One counterexample for David Friedman's entire argument to fall here. David Friedman's argument no longer works because there is one counterexample. And in fact, Gene Epstein doesn't even have to be an NAP absolutist. He could say, well, there's this guy, Liquid Zulu, and he's an NAP absolutist. So I have a counterexample there. So your argument completely fails. Everything you're trying to derive from it fails. And also, you use a reductio ad absurdum against the non-aggression principle. And but there is this counterexample. Your whole argument against the non-aggression principle is that nobody believes in it. But I've got one person who believes in it. Gene Epstein doesn't even have to believe in it to win here. He can just pick an NAP absolutist out. There's got to be one at Porkfest, right? Pick one guy who really believes in the NAP absolutism and will bite the bullet on anything, and it allows Gene Epstein to win this debate. Very easily, in fact.
It lets you feel yummy. You can say, look at those evil people who want to initiate coercion, but in fact, you would yourself be in favor of initiating coercion under some imaginable circumstances. So your fundamental disagreement is that you don't think those circumstances exist, that you believe we are in a world where we can prevent horrible things from happening without initiating coercion. That's a consequentialist argument, not a moral argument. The second problem with the non-aggression, with the NAP, is that it is a moral argument. And unfortunately, we have no way of deriving moral arguments. Ayn Rand thought...
Okay, so, very big precarious situation that David Friedman is in. Gene Epstein could agree that there is no way to derive moral arguments. He could accept that with open arms and then say, okay, so therefore, how is it the right way to do anything? Because there is no morality. David Friedman's got himself a very difficult resolution here. If Gene Epstein is able to kind of point out these more fundamental, like kind of philosophical problems. And I was also just thinking, whilst he was talking there, this is kind of what I was saying before, where Gene Epstein can use the existence of NAP absolutists like me to just win this debate, is that these NAP exceptionists, they should really like that there are NAP absolutists out there. Because it kind of allows them to maneuver around. It's like they can maneuver around these arguments that David Friedman is giving against the NAP, because they rely on there being nobody who is an NAP absolutist. So that kills all these arguments. But anyway, the fundamental problem here is then, okay, so he can't say that there's a right way to do anything. He can't say that libertarianism is true, because libertarianism is a moral theory, and he says that there is no such thing as morality. Outcomes can't be superior, okay, because again, that depends on ethics. By their standards, what kind of standard? Ethical standards? Right, but we don't have ethics anymore, so it's just subjective whim. So really what I was saying is that the way I like to persuade people of libertarian, of something, is that I say that they like it. Well, but that's not the resolution any longer. You've torn apart the resolution at any step. At every step, the resolution has had holes poked into it by David Friedman. So David Friedman, I don't know how you're going to prove this resolution any longer.
What she did. You can find a chapter in the third edition of my book, Machinery of Freedom, which is dedicated to taking apart her claimed argument, which I believe does not hold up. One of the striking things about Rand is that whenever there's a hole in her argument, she covers it up with beautiful rhetoric. She's a very good writer. Very brave woman, I should say, and an original woman. She's just wrong about quite a lot of things. Probably I'm wrong about quite a lot of things too, but I don't.
So saying there is no way to derive moral arguments would not just undermine his argument, but any argumentation at all, unless he means something more specific by moral apart from ethics. Yeah, I mean, he might be one of those people who are real pernickety about like, oh, morality means blah blah blah, and ethics means blah blah blah, blah 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 blah. Maybe, but I really want what he seems to be using this as a way to rebuke Ayn Rand. But Ayn Rand was definitely clearly talking about ethics and morality as being synonymous. So if he's saying, well, Ayn Rand was wrong that there are right ways to do things, Ayn Rand was wrong that there is a right way to do things. Uh-oh. Right, we've got a particular instance of the general ethical claims. That is, there's a right way to do things. That's a very general ethical statement. Right, that's just an affirmation of ethical realism. But it's just, he relies on ethical realism. This is all just, again, I mean, He's being very parasitic. So of course he relies on ethical realism to make this resolution make sense. Of course, that's just goes right back to his parasitism. It's like, oh, it's just their standards. I'm just adopting the Ayn Rand standard. I'm just adopting that there can be right ways to do things. And then, you know, I just build off of that, even though I think that the route is wrong. It's like, okay, well, he's not really saying anything then.
Don't know which ones. So as far as I can tell, David Hume was correct when he argued in the 18th century that there is no way of proving moral conclusions from the facts of reality.
Okay, let's just do companions and guilt, because specifically, David Hume says that you can't get from is to ought, right? You can't get from is to ought. That is, there can be no factual oughts. Okay, what is the David Hume statement actually? It says, you should not believe in, whoa, hold on. What was that word? You should not believe in these things. You ought not believe in these things. You ought not organize your mind in this way. It's an epistemic norm. But I thought there couldn't be any factual normative statements. But David Hume is making a normative statement saying that there are no factual normative statements. So is his own statement, therefore, no longer factual. Right? This is companions and guilt. This is a known problem, which I would like to see David Friedman kind of tackle, because Hume is making a normative claim when he's saying that you shouldn't be able to make normative claims as if they're fact. So where do we go from there? So you can't actually use David Hume's attack on moral realism. You might be able to use some other attack on moral realism, but at least David Hume's attack doesn't work. And even if we put ourselves in the shoes of Gene Epstein, and we assume that David Hume, we accept David Hume's attack on morality, on moral realism. Okay, so there can be no normative claims. Well then, there can't be a right or wrong way to persuade people of anything, right? And then Gene Epstein is able to win the debate just on that. Just on that one thing. He could stand up, he could just walk up to the podium and say, I agree with everything he said. There can be no right or wrong way of doing anything. Therefore, there is no right way to persuade people of libertarianism. And then he could go back and sit down and he would win the debate. Right, just on a factual level.
No way of getting from is to ought. And if there's no way of getting from is to ought, then even if you were happy, even if you believed in the NAP, you have no response to the person who says, why should I believe that? You have no way of showing him that the NAP is in fact a correct moral rule, which is what you need. Thank
you for the $2 Australian, Danny Cat. Are you still planning on making the Andor video? Yes, at some point. I don't know exactly when. It'll be a little bit of a bigger undertaking. So I want to kind of push it back a little bit. Probably do some smaller videos in the meantime. I'm thinking of maybe doing a review of Parasite. That should be pretty small. I've got a very concise thesis there. Yeah, get a couple of small ones out the way before I undertake any sort of big video again. Because I mean, this current one is very sizable.
Need to do. So that's the basis of my claim that the NAP is not, in fact, a satisfactory basis for defending libertarianism.
So the Andor video, it's something I was working on and planning for way back in season 1. In fact, some of the visuals I developed, I can actually show you this. Content. Very long ago, in fact. I'm scrolling way back. Yeah. I can show you this. I did use some of the assets from the Andor video for other things. Yeah, you can see this little squiggly border asset. I made this initially for the Andor video, but it's actually appeared in pretty much every video from now on. Right, I use this all the time. Yeah, no, it's I am definitely planning on at some point turning this into an actual video. I've got the thesis in my head. I've got the way it's going to be structured, but it'll be a little bit more in depth. But yeah, it should be very good. $10 trillion from Admetos. Thank you very much. It won't let me send it to you for some reason, so I'll DM it. Okay. I don't know why it's like fucking like that. These people want ethics to be some kind of, wow, you literally cannot physically do this action. Whereas it's, I can ignore the fact of gravity and jump off a building, thinking with all my might that I can fly. But it's not going to change the fact that I will nevertheless receive my punishment when the gun hits my face. Just as when I commit an act of evil, I destroy my hierarchy of values. Yeah, indeed. Because I think I was discussing this on Twitter with someone who was kind of trying to run that sort of gambit. It's like, oh, well, you know, I can't remember what specific argument they were making, but it was something along those lines. Yeah, it was like, but your ethics, your NEP, I'm still able to violate it. So there, it's like, okay, well, would you ever operate on the premise that the law of gravity does not exist? And there are objectivists in my replies being like, oh, what the hell are you talking about? It's not possible for the law of gravity to exist. It's like, yeah, I know, but it's possible to operate on the premise that it doesn't exist. That is entirely possible. And very, very similarly, it is possible to operate on the premise that the NEP doesn't exist. The NEP is a norm, just in the same way that you can have a normative fact of, there is a normative implication of the fact that there is a law of gravity. Let me try and find this actually. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, it's a classic. When the NEP is your god, because I was saying I would not violate the NEP. Would you ever choose to operate on the principle that gravity doesn't exist? The NEP isn't gravity. Yeah, I know that the NEP isn't gravity, but that isn't what I asked you. I asked you, would you ever choose to operate on the principle that gravity doesn't exist? Because I would never choose to operate on the premise that the non-aggression principle doesn't exist. Right? Pardon me. From Monhop for $3 Australian. Thank you very much. Do you think No Man's Sky is ANCAP adjacent? I don't know. It just seems like a video game to me. I don't know what that would entail. All right. Anyway, let's.
Nor is it even a principle that people really believe in. So the next step, somebody who's thinking very quickly might say, but if you cannot derive any normative conclusions, if you have no way of showing what's morally right, how can you make any arguments at all for what should happen? And the answer to that is that I don't have to derive moral arguments. I don't have.
You do, actually. You have to say that this is the right way to do something. So you do actually need to have a way to say that this is the right or wrong way to do something. You actually do need to derive that.
To derive values, because all of the people I want to convince already have.
Okay, so he doesn't even understand. He's skipping over this part and actually showing that it's superior by their standards. So he's going into the ethical parasitism. He's just parasitizing on things because he thinks that you can't actually have an ethics. So he's just got to be a parasite. He's just got to parasitize on whatever arbitrary ethics someone happens to hold. But how am I supposed to interpret this then?
Have moral beliefs. So I don't have to show what moral beliefs are true. I only have to show that in terms of their beliefs, not the stated principles that they say, but what ends they want, my system is better than the alternatives. If you observe people, you find that, in fact, most people agree mostly on what outcomes are desirable. Their beliefs aren't identical.
Most people, okay, so just most people in Germany, let's take Germany as an example. Most people in Germany, they mostly agree that it's desirable to exterminate the Jews. They mostly agree. So all I have to do is I just have to show that libertarianism is compatible with this. You can see the problem with this sort of like almost pragmatist argument. It's like, oh well, I just have to, be the little bottom feeder fish and just try and say, oh, superior ethicists. Oh, superior ethicists. Actually, my system is only here to serve your system. I'm only here to serve your system. My system can just help out your system. You can see that this puts you in a bit of a bottom feeder position, right? Because, you know, then you're just, you are constantly letting the enemy set the terms. Everybody else gets to set the terms. They get to say what is right or wrong. And we just have to twist ourselves into knots trying to justify their position with libertarian language. How does this solve anything? How is this the right way to persuade people of libertarianism? Libertarianism isn't anything goes. Libertarianism isn't whatever, right? It's not taking people's values as given. Libertarianism says none of that. It is a specific ethical system, which David Friedman rejects, in fact, because he says there is no true ethics. So he rejects libertarianism. So how is he going to say that so he's standing on the sidelines telling libertarians, he's saying, I'm not one of you libertarians, and there is no right way of doing anything. I'm not one of you because there's no right way of doing anything. And the right way to convince people is like, whoa, hold on, stop right there. Right? This is terrible. Rational Frontier for 100 rupees, thank you very much. If human action was automatic, then we'd not need ethics. It's because we can err that we need a code to guide us, indeed. How has objectivism and perhaps her aesthetic theory influenced your YouTube content style and presentation and other aspects about your content? Not much, because I mean, I don't consider my videos art. They're not art. They're factual statements. They're non-fiction. So, I mean, I just basically, I suppose in a sense, it's just, if you're an objectivist, you're going to want, you know, things to make sense. I'm not trying to be noisy in my videos. I'm trying to be very clean cut and straight to the point and everything. So I suppose in that sense, it will have influenced me, and obviously my speaking style will be influenced by the authors I read.
They give different weights to different things, but as far as I can tell, I've never yet heard anybody argue that the reason his economic system is better is that it produces more poverty, or more disease, or more ignorance, or worse novels.
Well, this guy has never encountered an environmentalist, I guess, because they want more poverty, they want more disease, they want less humans, they really do hate humanity. I don't think David Friedman understands just how evil the average person is when you really dig deep. They really do want these things. They want more poverty. They want this. They want that, right? The environmentalists, what is their big complaint? It's like, oh my God, all this consumerism, all this abundance. Ugh. They hate abundance. They hate that. They don't like that. They're against that.
That, as far as I can tell, pretty much everybody, if you look at the arguments they actually make, believes in about the same set of values, not identical values. And the reason that they proclaim different principles is that they disagree about what principles lead to what values.
It's not a straw man. MoXL. I'm not straw manning environmentalism. Oh my God. What is the good slug for this page? Okay, I know how to find it. Your channel. Got the slug. Oh my God, go away. Like, must have just been misspelling it, because I thought I was spelling that. I mean, I've got straight quotes from these people. I've got straight quotes. I just straight up use quotes from these people. Like they're not secretive about these things. Like, just read their statements. Just read their statements, look at what they're saying, and use like a dictionary, I suppose, if you're getting tripped up in the words. Just look at what they're saying, and they'll tell you straight to your face, yeah, we want a transformation of our economy. We want to generate good union jobs. We want to protect our climate. We want to... They're very open about these things. They aren't covert here. I don't know what else I can do here apart from just straight up quoting from environmentalists to show that this is what environmentalists want. I quote from them, and then drive out what the abstraction is. I can't help you any further than that.
I was struck quite a long time ago by the fact that if you look at the arguments that Marxists make, they seem to agree with our principles. Because in theory, Marxism says...
Whoa! Pause. They seem to agree with our principles. Pause. No, not even close. Marxists... Jesus Christ. Marxists believe that contradictions are true. How from there do we get to libertarianism? I suppose if libertarianism is just whatever, who cares? It's just a blob. It's always just trying to please the bigger ideology. Then yeah, I suppose it's just libertarianism is just whatever, right? But that isn't what libertarianism actually is.
Says from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, and
yeah, that's evil. Libertarians do not believe in from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Libertarians absolutely, we utterly repudiate that. We hate that. That is absolutely untoward. Not even close to what libertarians want.
They seem to agree with our principles. Because in theory, Marxism says from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And it would follow from that if workers are good at working, they should do the working. And if billionaires need Rolls Royces, they should get Rolls Royces.
No. From each according to his ability to each according to his need means that if you're really able, if you're the bourgeois, if you're really able, well, your ability should go to the needs of other people. You don't need the Rolls Royce. The need is being used as a claim on other people. This is a complete inversion. No Marxist believes this. Zero Marxists believe this. I suppose this is what happens when you make yourself an ideological cuck and you just gotta try and twist libertarianism to fit whatever other ideology. But like, that just puts you in the loser's seat. That's every cuck.
But in fact, the Marxist argument on exploitation is the claim that everything is produced by the workers, some of it is consumed by the capitalists, and that's wrong. Well, that's a libertarian argument. They've got the economics wrong, but the...
No, that is not a libertarian argument. Libertarian argument doesn't say, I suppose in a sense, he's correct. But like, it's not just the economics; it's the ethics is wrong, right? Marxists think that it is actually the production which is bad. It is actually the production which is bad, right? They do, if you really dig down, they really do hate if you're really productive. Because again, from each according to his ability to each according to his need, right? They're not just wrong in the economics. They are wrong in the economics. But if you're really productive, if you're super productive, they would say, hey, stop being so selfish. You need to give up your wealth. You need to be altruistic. They really do think these things. This is not, again, they're not secretive about this. These people are not secretive. Marx doesn't even recognize the individual outside of the collective. Yeah. Again, like, all you have to do is just read what these people say. Just sit down. It's the same with the environmentalists. Just sit down, read what they say. They don't hide it. They're very open with what they're saying. They will tell you openly. Just go up and ask one of them, and they'll tell you what they believe. Okay, you don't have to be like, this isn't like the Da Vinci's Code, right? You don't have to like, oh wow, he's done a Caesar shift 3 to the left, and you don't have to do any of that. You really don't have to do any of it. They just tell you. They just say it publicly and openly, and they're proud of it. Just listen to them.
Underlying principle is that you get ownership of something by producing it, which is our principle.
And not quite. It's not the production which yields ownership, because we don't believe in the labor theory of property. But that's a caveat.
The reason that this is enough, the reason that the imperfect agreement on ends is sufficient, is that a libertarian society is not just a little bit better than the alternatives. All right, if it were the case that we really faced the choice, do we have a welfare state or a complete laissez-faire system? And if the answer were with a welfare state, there will be fewer poor people, but the society as a whole will be a little bit poorer. The total income of everybody will be a little lower than somebody.
Yeah, again, this kind of, there's no vigor in this. There's no vigor, right? Listen to any libertarian, because again, I'm not even classing David Friedman as a libertarian here. Because libertarianism is an ethical theory, and he says there is no ethical theories. Okay, so he's not a libertarian. Listen to any libertarian talk about the welfare state. They have passion. There's like, oh my God, it's taking from people. It's taking from the productive to give to the unproductive. This is evil, right? It's punishing the good for being the good. This is envy. This is terrible. This is the most evil thing you could think of. But listen to David Friedman. It's like, well, yes, there will be fewer poor people, but overall, society will be a little bit less poor. No, this is not the way to go about this. This does not convince anybody. Where's your passion? Where's your fire, man?
Somebody who puts a high weight on helping the poor might say, I prefer the welfare state. But I don't think anybody in this room believes that if you actually...
Well, so this is just somebody who puts a higher weight on the poor, and they might say, well, yes, I prefer the welfare. There's the problem. There's the problem with trying to just warp libertarianism to fit whatever else somebody says. They can be real evil. They can be really evil, okay?
Look at the outcomes of various things ranging from welfare states to fully socialist systems. They are not just a little bit worse. Not even a little bit worse than the outcomes of relatively laissez-faire societies that have existed, let alone than at least we believe the outcome would be of a more fully laissez-faire society. Most of us believe, probably all of us believe, that a laissez-faire society would have less poverty. Interesting factoid, not a proof because correlation is not causation. If you look at poverty rates in the U.S. over the period since World War II, you observe...
I wonder how, in this line of argument, how would David Friedman deal with just an honest lover of poverty? They just come up and they say, yep, I love poverty. I imagine Ellsworth too strolls on up to David Friedman and he starts spewing his bit about how he wants to destroy the good and he hates integrity and all this. How would David Friedman deal with that? It's like, okay, well, actually, in a free market, if you wouldn't have as much integrity anymore, because you could destroy integrity all you want in the free market. Is that how he's going to do it? Is that how he's going to deal with it? And also, moreover, David Friedman, he keeps talking about how in the free market it's actually better for you have less poverty and all this sorts of things. What is a free market? We don't have the non-aggression principle anymore. That's out. Okay, David Friedman, define for me free market. What does that term mean? I don't know what that term means. Never heard it before. What does that mean? Well, it's an unhampered market where you don't have any aggression. Boom, out. No, that's not how he defines it. Okay, so how does he define it? I don't know. I genuinely do not know how David Friedman defines the free market. I really don't know what he means when he says free market. I have no clue. He could mean anything. Because again, it's, libertarianism can actually fit with communism. Communists really believe in the same things as, okay, Soviet Russia, that's what he means by free market. Okay.
That they fell steeply. The percentage of the population that was poor by a fixed definition fell steeply until roughly the point at which the war on poverty got fully funded. It has been roughly constant since then. That the intended effect of the war on poverty, Charles Murray's first book discusses this, was to get people out of poverty, to make people self-supporting. The actual effect was to make poverty somewhat less unpleasant and leave people poor. I was struck some years ago when I visited India by the fact that India, observed by a foreigner, looked like the picture of a capitalist society held by a loyal communist who had never been outside of the Soviet Union. It was a mass of miserably poor people, but then there was the business school I spoke at, which was in a lovely campus, trees, grass, surrounded by a high wall with barbed wire on top of it. India, at that time, had had a socialist government since it was founded. When I read a novel set in the Soviet Union, what struck me was that the obvious difference in status and income between the physician and that woman who cleaned his house was enormously greater than the difference I observed between me and people I hired to clean my house. One of whom is a UC Irvine student, or at least was a little while ago. Nice people. So that if you actually look at the results, if you say what we want is a society where you don't have massive inequality, in particular, you don't have people who are very...
Pause. We do not want a society where there's we don't care about inequality. Libertarianism doesn't say anything about, we want a society without massive inequality. Libertarianism does not say that. Doesn't say that. Does not say that at all. We're fine with inequality. Inequality is just a fact of nature. Okay, people just are not the same. They just are not equal. And in fact, it's good to have markets so that people can specialize into what they're specifically most unequal at.
Very poor.
You know, at MoXL, he can specialize into making ChatGPT written and 11 Labs voiced videos. He can just specialize into doing that. And, you know, we all have our different specialties. And this is fine.
Most of us believe and would argue that libertarian society is more likely to give that result, not less. People who disagree about politics quite often put the arguments, or at least imagine them, as you are evil people. You don't care if the poor starve. Or if we're doing it, you don't care if people's rights are violated. Putting your argument in terms of the NAP makes it easier for them to believe that. Because it sounds as though you're saying, well, I can't really show that you're wrong about the consequences of my policies, but I...
Okay, let's get it done. I do not care if poor people starve. It was easy. Yeah, now we can move on to the arguments. If people are getting themselves into poverty, they're not working, they're expecting everybody else to pay for it, yeah, I don't care if that person starves. Sue me.
I've got this principle which says that even if the poor starve, we still shouldn't violate property rights. Rhetorically speaking, in terms of persuading people, that's a very stupid argument.
No, actually, rhetorically speaking, this is very, very strong to bite the bullet. People see that and they're like, whoa, that's not something I've ever seen before. This is the whole thesis behind Isaiah's job. Literally to stand up there and say, yep, fentanyl should be legal. That really cuts through the noise. It cuts through the noise a whole lot more than, well, actually, in the free market, the communists, they really think the same thing as us, and we can all just kind of get along, and we all just kind of agree on the same. That does not cut through the noise. That is the noise. Okay, you need something to fucking, boom. Yeah, I don't give a shit if a poor person starves. Boom. That really, all eyes turn to you. They want to hear what the hell you're saying. Okay, this is very effective, way more effective than anything that David Friedman has concocted so far.
To make, whether you believe in the NAP or not. Because in fact, we do have good arguments. We do have good reasons to believe that the...
Well, actually, David Friedman, you should reject that we have good arguments. You should reject that because you don't think that there can be arguments pertaining to ethics. You don't think that there can be that. You don't think that's possible. You think it's all just arbitrary. It's just all whim. So, no, there is no better argument or worse argument as far as you're concerned.
System that we support produces better outcomes than the systems that they support. I like to, in an odd way, this is a rerun of a debate that I had in 1982. That was with George Smith, unfortunately no longer alive, very bright and interesting guy. And the title of that one was Economics versus Philosophy, which is the better foundation for libertarianism. And as I...
Obviously philosophy. Obviously philosophy. Because economics, what is it? It's a value-free science. Economics doesn't say anything about this is right, this is wrong. You know, this is right, this is wrong. Libertarianism, it says this is right, this is wrong. Libertarianism is an ethical philosophy. So, economics has nothing to say about it. Has absolutely nothing to say about libertarianism.
As I like to point out, philosophers still read Aristotle and economists don't. That is to say, there is...
I agree completely. I completely, yep. Philosophers still read Aristotle, economists don't. Why might we have so many problems today? Could it perhaps be because the scientists abandon Aristotle?
There's actually been quite substantial progress in economics over the last few centuries. I'm not sure there's been regress in philosophy. I would have said that Rawls is probably a step down, but there has not.
The point is, you only get those advancements in economics to the extent that you have good philosophy in place. Right? He's standing on the shoulders of all these giants. He's like, wow, look at this little ladder I made. It's like, yeah, great. We need to kill this giant. Whoa, hold on.
Not been the kind of progress that lets you say we actually know stuff. So it makes much more sense to base our argument on economics than our argument on philosophy. And in fact, if you look at the people who do it, you find that although not all economists are libertarian, and quite a lot of them are not anarchists, oddly enough, nonetheless, among academics, the economists are the ones who are most likely to be sympathetic to our views, and the philosophers, with the exception of Michael Huemer, those who are least likely to. So I think there is some evidence that...
And if you lose, again, if you lose that battleground in philosophy, if you lose that, the whole game's up, okay? He's looking at us almost losing the entire thing. He's saying, well, don't worry, the economists they're all fine. No, you're not going to be fine. Once that's lost, boom, poison immediately everywhere in society. And you won't be able to get everybody saying like, oh, well, we actually all agree with kind of the same things. Because agreeing with the same things, that comes from the philosophy, okay? It comes from the philosophy. So you need to protect the philosophy for any of your arguments to work, David Friedman. Is he not relying on an ethical norm here? Namely, that which is economically good for people should be supported. I mean, yeah, because what does it mean for something to be good? Like, what is an economic good? We don't know. It's value free, but he's trying to kind of steal values from elsewhere. He's just being a complete parasite.
Economics is a better way of persuading people than philosophy is. So to summarize my argument, it is that the NAP, as usually understood, has implications that nobody agrees with. It is that if you...
Nobody agrees with.
Take a weaker form of the NAP, such as minimizing coercion or compensating people when you violate their rights, it does not solve the problems, and in particular, no longer makes good arguments for libertarianism because you're now thrown back on consequentialist arguments about what policies will or will not violate more rights than others. And furthermore, that there is no way to derive the NAP, just as there is no way to derive anybody else's moral principles that I can see.
No way to derive any moral principles. I don't have to say anything. It's a wash.
That furthermore, we do not need the NAP because libertarianism is enough better than the alternatives so that it's better in terms of the values that most people already have. And that if you want to persuade people, showing them that a minimum wage will hurt poor people by pricing them out of the market, with the result that many of them are unemployed and never take the first step up the ladder that leads to a better life, is a whole lot better tactic than saying, well, you can't use you can't impose a minimum wage law because imposing a minimum wage law will violate the rights of the...
Again, no, much stronger tactic to be sticking to the rights. Much stronger, much stronger. Like these kind of limp-wristed, conservative, like, oh, well, you got to get the first run, let them pull themselves up by the bootstraps, give them the first rung on the ladder, blah, blah, blah. These have been tried for, the past century or so. What has been the effect? The communists just keep winning step by step by step by step. We might want to do a little bit of introspection here and figure out why. Why do the communists keep winning? Why do they keep pushing forward in society? Why is that? Why are there minimum wage laws everywhere? Why do they so thoroughly win the argument if it's so much more effective to be if most economists are against it, and it's or way more likely to be against it, it's so much more effective to use the economic argument? Why have the minimum wage people won so thoroughly? Let's analyze that for a second.
employee and the employer to make whatever contract they want. So that's my basic argument, and I will give my opponent the 55 seconds that are still left. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go fill my water. Just to recap, David Friedman can't say that there's a right way to do anything, because he doesn't believe in ethics. He can't say anything about what libertarianism is, because he doesn't believe in ethics. He can't say what it means for an outcome to be superior, because he doesn't believe in ethics. So he has to fall back on it being by their standards. So libertarians, communists really agree with us. What even needs to be said there? It's purely parasitic, and he didn't actually show that the non-aggression principle was flawed. So in his opening statement, he has in fact destroyed literally every piece of evidence that he would need to prove this resolution. So not doing great at all. Hopefully Gene Epstein is able to find some of these philosophical flaws. Obviously, I'm able to sit here and pause to articulate my thoughts. But hopefully Epstein's able to do that. Yeah, I'll be right back in 5 minutes or something. Hello. Alright, so Gene Epstein's opening. Obviously this is not a rebuttal, so we won't necessarily see if Gene does go into those philosophical problems I pointed out before. We won't necessarily see it here. So I mean we could do, because I mean he's doing the affirmative, I suppose. We'll see Gene Epstein trying to present some sort of defense of the NAP, hopefully. Or even just a negation of this, saying that there can be a right way to do things. That would be sufficient as well to win. It wouldn't be the best, but it would be sufficient. Yeah. So he thinks the zap plays an essential role. So we'll see.
Now to establish.
Thanks. Everybody can hear me? Yeah, okay. In a forthcoming biography of the brilliant economist Milton Friedman, we learn about the daily debates Milton conducted with his wife and kids. According to the book, Milton's son David recalls that he was, quote, a senior in high school before he realized that there were forms of conversation other than argument. While debates usually persisted across dinners, the book continues, the family relied on a numerical code to establish clear victories. A declaration of 2 stood for, you are right, I was wrong, close quote. Needless to say, David will make my day if he flashes me a 2 once we conclude our debate. But I certainly don't expect such an outcome against an opponent with that kind of training. But I do wonder if the Friedman family ever debated today's topic. So if so, I'm going to guess that Milton took my position. Consider what Milton once said about the war on drugs. Quote.
Okay, so he's gonna presumably try and show that, hey, based on Friedman's position, he really should be an adherent of the non-aggression principle. I mean, potentially could work, but then Friedman can just say, no, I'm only arguing for the resolution as stated. I'm not arguing for anything else I've ever written. So he could get around that.
The major basis for my opposition to the war on drugs has not been that it's produced a lot more harm than good. It's been primarily a moral view. I do not believe the state has any more right to tell me what can come out of my, what to put in my mouth than it has to tell me what can come out of my mouth.
And indeed, that is very much contradictory to everything that Friedman has been arguing for here. He's been saying that there can be no moral truths. But if his primary opposition to something is a moral one, well, then he's arguing from ethics. So I don't know why he wasn't arguing from ethics when he relies on it.
These two are essentially the same thing, and they are both essential elements of freedom, close quote. So in making his case against the government's war on drugs, Milton was forthrightly stating his belief in the centrality of the non-aggression principle, or what I prefer to call the zero aggression principle, or ZAP, after libertarian philosopher Gerard Casey. As Casey puts it, no one, whether individually or as a member of a group, may initiate or threaten to initiate the use of physical violence or aggression against the person or property of another. Close quote.
I mean, that's not a great definition of it, but I do like, zero aggression principle, so hopefully he will actually endorse zero aggressions.
Quote. The war on drugs is the state threatening aggression against us if we dare to exercise our right to put certain chemicals in our bodies. By viewing the freedom argument as central, Milton wasn't ignoring the arguments that the war on drugs also does far more harm than good. Rather, he was placing the burden of proof where it belongs, on those who would defend the idea of putting people in a cage for doing something that could harm nobody but themselves.
That is also true, and this is something I've mulled over in the past, which is that you can almost just avoid any sort of arguments over the NEP when you just recognize, well, hey, they're the ones who are claiming that they have the right to be violating, your property and everything, to be going against you. The second comer, the late comer, they actually have a burden of proof to show that they take precedence because it's already being used by someone. So the burden is on them to show that they take precedence over this already ongoing thing. I don't think it's necessarily complete, but there is definitely something there.
Now take the consequentialist case that David would make. Defenders of the government's war on drugs have a much easier time responding to it. They can logically object that a world in which all drugs are completely legal is a world that does not as yet exist. And since it doesn't exist, we libertarians can't rule out the danger that drug addiction will become so common it will tear at the fabric of society. The only effective way to respond to that point is to invoke Milton's moral argument. The burden of proof is not on us libertarians to argue that our society could survive full legalization of drugs. The burden is on them to prove that it will lead to horrific outcomes. And since they're talking about a world that does not as yet exist, it's a burden they can't sustain. In this case, then, David would have us believe that the right way to persuade people of the libertarian solution to the government's war on drugs is by showing them that the outcomes of full legalization are superior without any resort to the flawed non-aggression principle. My point, by contrast, is that not only does it greatly help to cite the zero aggression principle when making this argument, it's often essential. Another example, the libertarian case for
I wouldn't necessarily say often essential. It is the fundamentals. It's always essential.
free trade. No one has done a better job than David in explaining the economic gains from trade. He asks us to consider two ways to make cars: build them in a domestic factory or grow them in the form of wheat. Do it the second way, ship the wheat to Japan, and a few months later, ships appear loaded with Toyotas. That's a way of convincing people about the benefits of trade by pointing to a positive outcome. But it doesn't address a key objection raised by economist Russ Roberts. You start to make the case for free trade, Russ Roberts observed in a recent interview, and people are saying, right, but the folks who are left behind, their lives aren't meaningful anymore. And you respond, oh, but look at the gains from trade. That's the way the economist deals with the fact that sometimes imports are hard for people. I think the economist view is really bad. Close quote. The problem, then, is that David's argument doesn't directly address Russ Roberts' objection. When you allow imports of Toyotas to destroy jobs along with the communities in which those job holders live, the lives of those affected aren't meaningful anymore. The only way to respond is by asking, what right does the government have to penalize me for using my money to buy imported goods or services that I freely choose to buy? If domestic workers want to keep my business, they are perfectly free to lower their prices, to lower their wages, while getting their firms to lower their prices.
Yeah, this is entirely correct. He is correct here. That the moral argument is the more fundamental one. That really what matters is, well, what gives them the right? What gives you the right to do that? And of course, we're talking about persuading people of libertarianism. So you have to, that is what you need to do as far as this debate is concerned. Because it's not just convincing people to call themselves libertarians. Yeah, definitely. David Friedman's way is going to be real good at convincing people to call themselves libertarians, perhaps. He might be able to get a whole bunch of fiat libertarians, because he's just adopting their standards. Even the communists can be a libertarian, right? But that is not actually libertarianism. And now Gene is getting into, well, for libertarianism, it has to be some sort of a moral argument. That is a more fundamental argument. The economist argument, that's completely different. That's not the libertarian argument.
And domestic workers and their supporters are quite free to create a Buy American shopping website that patronizes only domestic firms on the grounds that many Americans' lives will otherwise lose their meaning. That domestic shopping website might attract a lot of followers. For many years after World War II, Jews boycotted German cars, even though the cars offered great value. My own father participated in that silent boycott, and then later he would buy only US-made cars for patriotic reasons. My father did.
$5 from Ad Meadows, thank you very much. Good to see the local jester make an appearance after not seeing him for the last couple of streams. Too bad he couldn't tell me if rock has values, indeed. Mr. Perfect evolutionary being.
Did all this voluntarily. The government had no right to coerce him into buying American-made cars if he preferred to buy cars from abroad. So in making the case for free trade, not only does it greatly help to cite the zero aggression principle, it's often essential. That's because no consequentialist case for radical reform made by a libertarian can ever be completely sufficient. The consequentialist case is usually important, but we also need to invoke the zero aggression principle to establish the point that our default position is always in favor of freedom and free choice, and the burden of proof is always on those who would restrict our freedom and free choice. I could apply this same argument to many other aspects of the libertarian case, from gun rights to legalizing sex work to preventing the waging of war. But in the time remaining, I want to focus on the other key point in David's argument, that the zero aggression principle, or ZAP, is in some crucial way a flawed principle. David makes several key points against the ZAP in his book.
Hopefully, what he does here is to say, hey, a reductio ad absurdum is not an argument. No, at best it could show that the person you're arguing against is inconsistent. Okay, it could do that. But it doesn't actually disprove the non-aggression principle. It doesn't do anything to disprove it. I am hoping that's the route he goes down here.
The machinery of freedom. One is that, quote, libertarians have not yet produced any proof that our moral position is correct, since, quote, lots of people are in favor of initiating coercion. One possible response to such people, as proposed by philosopher Gerard Casey, is that if they reject the zero aggression principle, they logically open themselves up to the risk that someone else will initiate aggression against them. And then they'll have no principled grounds on which to reject such aggression. And while many authoritarians won't be impressed by this argument, I don't see why we should be the least bit impressed in return. Some might reject the idea that murder is a crime, but that doesn't mean we have to agree with them. Here's another of David's arguments. When it comes to aggression against someone's property, it's impossible to draw the line at what does and does not constitute such aggression. Quote,
impossible to draw the line. Okay, so I assume he's going into a continuum problem.
If I fire a 1,000 megawatt laser beam at your front door, I am surely violating your property, David writes. But what if I reduce the intensity of the brightness to a flashlight or to turn on my light in a house or strike a match? David then comments, the obvious response is that only significant violations of my property rights count.
That is wrong. That is not the response I would give. It wouldn't be, well, it's only if it's a significant violation of property. I'd say whenever it's a violation of property rights, that's bad. But it's not a violation of property rights to have a single photon come off of your match and hit someone's front door. That doesn't initiate any conflicts. They in fact have zero way of even knowing that this photon ever hit their door. So it doesn't interfere with their use of the door. Right, in the same way that sending radio waves through someone's house, it doesn't interfere with their use of the house. It doesn't initiate any conflicts over the use of the house. But if those radio waves keep increasing in intensity, and now they're gamma rays, well, that actually does interfere with your use of the house because it starts, giving you cancer and everything. It starts, lighting fires in your kitchen. It starts doing a bunch of bad things. But it's all just EM waves, right? But they're different in kind. There is a difference from one end of the extreme to the other end of the extreme. Okay? And it's at the point when it initiates conflict. That is the bad part. That's when it is criminal. And, I suppose David Friedman would want me to sit here in my armchair and rationalistically deduce the exact number of photons needed to hit your house before it's aggression, but I'm not a rationalist. I can't do that. I'm an empiricist. This is why judges are an important thing. We can't just have jurists who like sit there in Hegel's armchair and deduce all of reality from it. You can't do that. It's not possible to do. You have to have the judge there to look at the facts of the case and say whether or not there was an aggression, and therefore what the punishment would be. Right? That's what the judge does.
But then he clinches the argument with the challenge, but who decides what is significant? But doesn't David's challenge of where to draw the line apply to a whole range of cases most of us subscribe to, including David himself?
I don't think this is the best way to go about responding to. As far as I'm aware, it's like, well, David's being inconsistent here. So, well, again, that only shows that David is being inconsistent. That does not disprove the argument he's making. It doesn't debunk the argument he's making to say that he doesn't fully agree with it. Okay, whatever, he doesn't fully agree with it, but is the argument true or not?
The law against assault and battery. If someone extends his hand to you for a handshake and then breaks the bones of your hand, that painful injury would surely justify an actionable claim. But what if someone merely gives you a firm handshake? If people with merely firm handshakes were getting indicted for assault and battery, would David argue that we have to regard the assault and battery as potentially discardable and flawed and full of holes? There are those who claim to feel battered if someone makes an innocuous remark that they decide to take personally. And there have been co-op buildings in Manhattan where smoking tobacco in your apartment was forbidden, even with your doors and windows closed, on the bizarre grounds that you might seriously infect your neighbors in other apartments with secondhand smoke. So maybe we'll soon have neighbors charging you with aggression if you turn on the lights in your house. The very danger David warns against. Okay. But we can only hope to live in a sane society where reasonable people adjudicate such matters reasonably and sanely. It doesn't mean we discard the zero aggression principle. David's other objection involves cases in which someone commits aggression in extenuating circumstances. One of David's favorite cases involves your neighbor falling from his balcony and grabbing a flagpole on your balcony in order to break his fall.
Again, we've gone over the many problems with the flagpole scenario already. We'll see what Gene is going to hit on here. Hopefully, I hope to Ayn Rand. Peace be upon her. I hope to Ayn Rand that he doesn't go with, well, I just commit the aggression and then I'd accept the punishment. Because again, we've gone over how that is utterly terrible, does not work as a response.
That person has clearly trespassed on your property.
I had to quit the stream for an hour. How's it gone? Total David Friedman destruction. Based on his opening statement, he has destroyed every aspect of what he needs to argue for the resolution. And we're going to see Gene's been doing all right in his opening statement. I haven't had much to comment on. But I mean, he doesn't necessarily have that much to sink his teeth into yet.
To break his fall. That person has clearly trespassed on your property. If my balcony had been invaded in this way, I would only be happy that my neighbor wasn't injured while marveling at his physical dexterity. But if others did bring charges of trespass, the intruder would have to plead guilty because the zero aggression principle is an absolute principle that is always.
Well, it's have to plead guilty. Well, there are actually two aspects to guilt. There's actus reus, which means the guilty act, and there's mens rea, which means the guilty mind. Indeed, if I was falling down and I grabbed on this flagpole and I like maybe damaged one of the screws or something, then yeah, absolutely, I committed the guilty act. Okay, but I didn't have a guilty mind. I don't have mens rea. So ethics can't really tell you never do the guilty act. It says never have the guilty mind. Right? That's really specifically what it's saying. Obviously, you shouldn't do guilty acts, but if you're choosing to do guilty acts, then you do have mens rea, right? You might accidentally commit aggression. That is absolutely possible. Yes, you might accidentally commit aggression. Then yeah, you should definitely pay restitution. But like, really, ethics can't judge you for accidents unless it was, you're being negligent in some way, right? Yeah, the guilty mind is the negligence. Yeah, if you were being negligent, then you would have mens rea. But if you truly don't have any mens rea. If you are in this ethical cold open and you spawn in, it's like, what the heck? And you grab onto this pole, and it's like, hey, that was my flagpole. You just damaged it. So okay, right, yeah, I'll pay for the damages. You like literally weren't acting there. You don't have any choice in the matter about that. You were just teleported into this situation, and it's like, okay, well, yes, I did the guilty act, but there was literally no way to avoid that guilty act. Based on the hypothetical where it just gets spawned in, and it's like you were halfway through raping a woman. It's like, what? You know, why? How did I get here? It's like that's kind of one of these problems with these ethical cold opens. Is that you get into strange scenarios. It's like, I mean, that's why we have the non-aggression principle, so you don't get yourself into these situations in the first place.
Actionable. Always actionable, always absolute. But then there's the question of punishment. The intruder would be well advised to plead for mercy on the ground that he meant no harm and was only trying to save his own life. Or suppose, quote, suppose you happen to know that everyone in the world is going to die tomorrow by some natural catastrophe, writes David. Further suppose that the only way to prevent it involves stealing a piece of equipment worth $100 from someone who rightfully owns it, close quote. Do you steal the equipment and save the world? I certainly would. After my crime was committed, I would explain to the owner of the equipment the...
Why wouldn't you just buy? Why don't you just buy one? Right? $100, I mean, I can fucking afford $100. Spend the money. And presumably he's going on to like, well, I would accept the punishment. And what would the punishment be if not restituting the guy with the $100? Right, like, you've clearly got the money already.
Reason for my theft. If he still brought charges against me, I would be forced to admit my guilt. So there is never any question that in all of these cases, aggression against property has occurred and is therefore an actionable offense. It is an absolute principle, always applied absolutely. The separate question is the penalty imposed. At my trial,
again, this is kind of going into the realm of the virtuous crime, which, I mean, gone over at length. Like, you can't just say, well, I'll just accept punishment and then it's all okay, because the punishment, it doesn't make it all okay. Right? If Hitler just accepted the punishment for the Holocaust, like, that's not... the Holocaust wasn't suddenly fine. It was still a horrible thing that he did. No amount of punishment can undo that. It's still bad.
I would ask that in imposing punishment, those who judge me take into account that I was saving everyone in the world from extinction. Another example from David. Quote, suppose we are threatened with military conquest by a particularly vicious totalitarian government. If the conquest is successful, we will lose most of our freedom and many of us will lose our lives, close quote. Under these circumstances, says David, wouldn't we favor forced conscription to raise an army, even though conscription is slavery and therefore...
It's the Dave Smith argument. Whoa, I can't possibly bite the bullet on conscription, because maybe conscription's... It's like, no. I am perfectly willing to bite this bullet. No conscription ever. I never want any conscription. No sirree. Okay? Don't have any conscription. Volunteer armies only, okay? That's it. Very easy to bite that bullet.
For never justified. As David writes, isn't temporary slavery better than the permanent slavery of totalitarian rule? I would still be against conscription. First, of course...
Okay, good. Gene Epstein, more consistent than Dave Smith proven, right here. Brilliant.
Conscription would only be necessary if we couldn't get enough volunteers to resist the invader and enough folks voluntarily offering the money to back these volunteers. But who was to say before the fact that an army of possibly reluctant conscripts would be victorious against the invader?
Yeah, that's the other thing is... conscript armies really doesn't work well because, I mean, the economic calculation problem is socialism in military. You socialistically bring in a bunch of these conscripts, you enslave them. Like, this slave isn't going to really have any incentive to work well for you, right? He doesn't want to work for you, right? How is this going to be an effective fighting force? If it's an actual volunteer army, where you've got actual, professional soldiers or training for years, and they're getting paid, and this is their job, this is their career. Well, then you've got actual expertise to fall back on, not just this this nonsense of hey, you you still got your legs and your arms. Put on this suit. We're shipping you off to the front line. He's like, I don't know, what the fuck? Yeah. He doesn't know how to fucking use a gun or understand tactics or anything like that. He doesn't know any of this. He's like, well, it's fucking like insurance broker or some shit. Like, he doesn't, this is not his area of expertise. You want the division of labor. You want the people who are best at fighting to be your fighters, and you want them to actually be volunteers, and you want a free market here.
We'd then be choosing temporary slavery without necessarily avoiding the permanent slavery that David warns against. But then who's to say that the slavery would be permanent? As Murray Rothbard has pointed out, the main reason a conquering country can rule a defeated country is that the latter has an existing state apparatus to transmit and enforce the victor's orders onto a subject population, close quote. No such apparatus would exist in a libertarian society. Instead, as Rothbard also points out, the occupiers would likely be confronted by resistance fighters whose persistence could eventually drive the victors out.
And that's also a very good point there, from Rothbard, of course, that the libertarian society, it would be so guerrilla right from the top to bottom. It really is not going to be very easy to take over such a society. Like, fucking the US spent, 19 years in Afghanistan to take out the Taliban. Moment they leave, who's in charge? The Taliban. They failed. Okay, they failed after billions of dollars, like perhaps even more. Like, more guns doesn't mean you win. That's not how warfare works.
Out. Such things have happened in the past. In his 1973 book, The Machinery of Freedom, David wrote, I believe that everyone has a right to run his own life, to go to hell in his own fashion, close quote. The right to go to hell in one's own fashion without interference from the...
And it's interesting to hear David Friedman talking about rights, because he said that there's no such thing as ethics, so how can you have any theory of rights? He's not getting it from the flawed non-aggression principle. That's not where he's getting his rights. So, whereas David, I really want to see Gene hammer on this. What does it mean? What are you even talking about rights? What are you talking about here? You don't have a right to do anything. You said it yourself.
State or from others is in fact the essence of the zero aggression principle stated in audacious terms. Getting back to those legendary debates at Friedman family dinners, did David think up that great line in the heat of debate and save it for the book he would eventually write? I like to imagine he did. Thanks.
All right, so now presumably rebuttal from Friedman.
7.5 minutes. Yeah, 7 minutes. 7.
So David now has 7.5 minutes to rebut.
I was hoping.
All right, so what would David Friedman's rebuttal here consist of? Really, what I'm interested in is rebuttal to David Friedman, because he's got the affirmative and he has torn down any way to argue for the affirmative here. He's completely destroyed his own case. So I suppose, I don't know, is he just going to recapitulate his opening statement? Let's see.
Hoping that when Gene started out by telling you about our family code number 2, that the next thing he was going to say was number 2, and that would then end the debate, but apparently not. He's mistaken about our debates in a number of ways. To begin with, while my father certainly made moral arguments, as I did and do, he did not put them in terms of the absolute NAP, for presumably the...
But you're still making moral arguments, so you can't just say NAP out because there is no such thing as morality, because you are still making moral arguments. We're companions in this guilt, David Friedman.
Sort of reasons that I've discussed. He, in fact, was in favor of taxation. He was, one of the things we ended up disagreeing about was whether or not you should have an anarchist society. And his position was that the system I described might work, but probably wouldn't. My position was that it might not work, but probably would. I devote a chapter of the 3rd edition of Machinery to discussing ways in which it might break down. That was a consequentialist disagreement. He did not at any point say, but in order to have my limited, or did I say, in order to have this limited state, you've got to have taxation, and taxation is immoral.
Yeah, and he just described perfectly why his sort of argument is much weaker. Because he ultimately doesn't have the final blow, which is this is violating people's rights. This is immoral. You're committing theft here.
So in fact, my father was not an anarchist and I was. And in fact, as Gene might have deduced from looking at the first edition of the Machinery of Freedom, which was written in about 1970, I think it was published in 72, as I remember, I was indeed more fond of moral arguments then than now. So that my guess is that in our arguments, I probably often used moral arguments, though not put as explicitly as the NAP back then. I should say, lest you overestimate just how retarded I was in understanding a conversation, I did enter my senior year in high school when I was 15. But with regard to Gene's response with regard to the war on drugs, it is certainly true that we cannot prove that abolishing the war on drugs would have good effects. You cannot prove that continuing the war on drugs has good effects. You can't even say it has observable effects now, but next year is going to be different. Every year is different.
Okay, well, he's kind of flirting with a little bit of pragmatism here. It's like, oh, well, the principles change, so who really knows? This is kind of the problem with his viewpoint here. Is it doesn't, when you're arguing from ethics, it's, no, this is evil, this is bad, this is wrong, stop doing it. That doesn't change from year to year. It's not, oh, well, who really knows? It's all in this big Heraclitean flux. That's why. That's one of the reasons why it's so weak.
Unfortunately,
again, the standard of this debate is what is persuading people of libertarianism, right? That is the standard. So it actually matters which one is rhetorically weaker.
There are very few things one can prove in this world. One has to.
It's a complete stolen concept fallacy to start using ethical arguments while rejecting ethics. Indeed, yeah. Stolen concepts all around, as far as Friedman's concerned.
Be satisfied with
even the market, the free market. I went into this a little bit earlier. Free market, that's a stolen concept for David Friedman, because he has no way to tell us what a free market is. It's a stolen concept. What does it mean, David Friedman, to have a free market? What does that mean?
With the best arguments one can offer, reasons to believe something is true, not proofs that something is true. With regard to Russ Roberts' argument, which I haven't read, but I've just gotten from Gene, I do not claim that my story about growing Hondas proves that tariffs are bad. What it does is to prove that some arguments for tariffs are bad. It shows that the trade-off is not between the welfare of American auto workers and Japanese auto workers, which is the way most people who support tariffs imagine it, but rather between the welfare of American auto workers and American farmers. Well, American farmers can also have their way of life destroyed by an insufficient demand for what they are doing. But in general, I don't think one can prove, in a sense of establishing 100% probability, that libertarian society is better. All one can do is to show good reasons to believe it is better, and that's the best that one can ever do. I was sort of puzzled by Gene's argument that you should accept the NA.
You'd probably say that a free market is what most people want. I mean, maybe, yeah. The free really these communists, they want the same thing. They also want a free market. Like, okay, well, Soviet Russia, that's your free market. Brilliant.
NAP, because if you don't accept the NAP, then you might be at risk of having people coerce you. I presume that lots of you do accept the NAP, and nonetheless you get coerced. That there seems to be a bizarre logic in which you suppose if I believe something, that forces everybody who interacts with me to believe it. It isn't true.
That's not quite what was said. It was said that, and then you'd have no objection. You'd have no principled objection. If you reject the NAP, then you have no principled objection against people initiating conflicts with you. That's the point. Is that these, people they're no longer allowed to hum and haw about rights because they reject rights. David Friedman, he rejects rights, so he can't hum and haw about rights.
So that's not, in fact, an argument for believing in the NAP. I notice that Gene, on his expressed principles, has to approve of eminent domain because he has told us that it is all right to violate people's property rights, provided you're willing to bear the cost that results. And in eminent domain, we have a legal process. It's not a jury trial, as it happens, but a legal process for determining how much the government owes you for the property that it seized. And that seems to be his view of how you settle such questions. Yeah, I want to go back to the fact that, as I think I made clear yesterday, my arguments for anarchy are not claimed proofs. My favorite online writer, Scott Alexander, ended his review of Machinery of Freedom with the comment that he hoped my system would be tried somewhere far from him. He was right. I think it's better, but obviously it's better if somebody else tries it. And if it doesn't work, that doesn't affect me. And if it does work, then I can imitate it then. We live in a world of uncertainty, even if we like to pretend we don't.
And it's like, and he's saying that this is more rhetorically powerful than the radical argument, is to say, yeah, indeed, I agree. We should try it fucking way off there. It's better if we try it way off there. I don't want to be on the ground floor. And this is supposed to be rhetorically stronger than the radical who says, yes, press the button now till your finger blisters. I want it in my country, in my area, right now. The whole hog. That's what I want right now. Not tomorrow, not somewhere else, right now, right here. Which one strikes you as more rhetorically powerful? I don't know. It seems pretty obvious to me that the radical argument is way more powerful. Whose side is Zulu on? Well, I'm on the side of the non-aggression principle, but it seems that Gene Epstein isn't particularly on that side. I mean, he's somewhat. He doesn't think it's absolutist, I don't think. I'm an absolutist for the non-aggression principle. And David Friedman has destroyed, if you go back to the opening statement part, he has destroyed every part of his resolution, which he's speaking on the affirmative for. Friedman is completely failed. If I was on that stage, cross-examination would have been brutal for Friedman.
That one of the things that I find irritating here is the number of people who are absolutely 100% certain who are the bad guys, who are the good guys, what's right, what's wrong. We don't live in that world. We live in a world where the best you can do is to look at the arguments, look at the evidence, and read.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, we don't know. It's all gray. We don't even know if. There's communists. They seem to agree with it. And this is supposed to be, this is supposed to have oomph behind it. This is supposed to be the rhetorically powerful thing. No, not even close.
Reach conclusions. Now, I should say, I am not arguing that you should never make
absolutist, or in other terms, you actually believe in it as a principle. Indeed, yeah, that's. I think if you're not an NAP absolutist, then you just disagree with the NAP. Okay, just be honest. Just be honest about that. I'm sick of these people who are just not honest about what their beliefs are. It's terrible.
Moral arguments. Clearly, rhetorically, moral arguments sometimes persuade people because sometimes people share some of your moral beliefs, as well as some of your consequential beliefs. But what I don't think people share, if they think about it, is the strong form of the libertarian preferred moral belief, which is the NAP. Because, as I've pointed out, it leads to conclusions that none of us really believe in. And you don't solve the problem by saying, well, it's actually all right to initiate coercion. You just have to pay for it, which, as far as I can tell, is Gene.
Indeed, that is a bad argument. He's correct there. That is a bad argument, but that doesn't save him from all of these terrible, terrible things that he's caught on the flow already.
Gene's solution to it. I think that's most of what I wanted to say. Let me point out some evidence that I've observed about people disagreeing less in even their moral beliefs than they think they do. That if you argue with a socialist about whether or not property owners are allowed to own property, it rapidly turns out that your imaginary story for the poor guy and the rich guy is very different from his. That in your imaginary story, the rich guy spent his resources hacking down the jungle to plant a field while the poor guy sat there watching. In the socialist view, the poor guy hacked out the field and then the rich guy stole it from him. And I think that suggests that there is more common.
Again, no. I mean, you actually see this in communist regimes where you're not allowed to hoard resources, right? They're so against hoarding resources that you obtained yourself, right? It's like you're being so selfish. You got to give that back to the party, back to the people. This, again, with all these things, they're not secretive about what they're asking for. They're really not secretive. And Friedman has to jump through so many hoops and bend himself backwards to try and show that, well, actually, the communist agrees with us. He really likes it. He really loves libertarianism in the end. So we all have the same principles, and apparently that isn't the non-aggression principle. Well, I guess we don't have the fucking same principles, because I believe in the non-aggression principle. So I don't have the same principles.
even in the underlying moral intuitions, let alone the underlying beliefs of what people want. So I think I've made my argument. We're going to have some time for you people to ask questions, and we will see what Gene's rebuttal is.
We will very soon be going to question and answer. So I'd like you guys to be thinking of questions for both the affirmative and the negative, and I'll be taking those in session. But
I think one big question for David Friedman is, what is a free market? Without any reference to the non-aggression principle or any moral principles, can you tell me how to define a hampered as against an unhampered market? Tell me how to do that without any ethical principles. I don't think he can do it. I don't think it's possible for him to do that.
But to rebut for the negative is Gene.
I was looking forward to getting a fuller story and getting corrected by David about my little mention about Milton Friedman. I love that passage in the book that has actually not yet been released, but my son read it in pre-release and showed me that passage, which I really loved. And in fact, as a columnist at Barron's, I interviewed Milton Friedman, and 2 or 3 times a year I would call him up just for a chat. In fact, I spoke with him about a month before he died, and that was one of the great pleasures of my life. And so I wanted to provoke some reminiscence about Milton. Everything David said about Milton is true. I concede that completely. He knew him better than I, even though I had the pleasure of getting to know him as a columnist at Barron's. But let me just read to you what David just said, which is essentially what I'm trying to say.
Again, so the thing is Gene Epstein needs to hit. David Friedman can't say there's a right or a wrong way to do anything, including to persuade people, because he doesn't think there can be right or wrong. He doesn't think there is any right or wrong way to do anything. It's all just personal whim. He can't talk about this being persuading people of libertarianism, because again, libertarianism is a moral philosophy, and David Friedman rejects moral philosophy. He can't show that outcomes are superior, because again, superior, that's an ethical judgment, so he has to fall back on superior by their standards. Whoops. He's being an ethical parasite. That is, he relies on some prior ethics to make any sort of claim. So you can't be a David Friedmanite tabula rasa. It doesn't work. It's not possible. And he has not disproven the non-aggression principle. All at most he has done is show that nobody in the audience believes in the non-aggression principle. But if there's one person who believes in the non-aggression principle, then there's a counterexample to his claim that nobody believes in the non-aggression principle. And further, even if nobody believed in the non-aggression principle, if 0 people believed in the non-aggression principle, that does not prove that the non-aggression principle is false. Right? Because we don't believe in the primacy of consciousness. That's just the primacy of social consciousness. Nobody believes in it, therefore it's false. So those are kind of the points I want to see Gene hitting here. Not sure if he'll do any of those, though.
There are very few things one can prove in this world. Indeed. Obviously, the fact that we can prove a few things, you guys are sitting here, very few things one can prove in this world. And that's the reason why David's powerful consequentialist arguments, part of which I enlisted, need the grounding of what I again prefer to call the zero aggression principle. Precisely because there are very few things we can prove in this world. We need to tell people I have met who fantasize that 90% of the country is going to get drunk on drugs and the other 10% is going to starve. Again, David mentioned Russ Roberts, but didn't speak to his concern. Russ is now an economist. He prefers to talk about human feeling. We do look at communities that got broken up by free trade and all the rest of it. And Russ says, oh, the gains from trade, it's pathetic. We can't talk about that. Look at those people who suffered. So my point is to ground it in the zero aggression principle, but then also recognize that people, in terms of their purchases, often feel compassion for others. The idea that people would buy American and for patriotic reasons, my own father did it. The point is that once we ground it in the zero aggression principle, then we can understand these things. David mentioned...
Okay, so basically trying to show that any of these economic arguments, they actually have to be grounded in the non-aggression principle to have any persuasive weight. Because otherwise it comes down to, well, they might just, outright reject that it matters more, right? So you actually have to have the moral argument is more fundamental. I mean, that is true. But But there are bigger problems with David Friedman's statement here.
In the eminent domain, but of course I'm not for it. The burden of proof is someone who take your property. By the way, I don't know if David's in love with the Chicago thesis. The Chicago guys have it wrong. If your property, the Austrians teach us that all value is subjective. For the government to give you the market price for your property, well, what if your ancestors are buried on that property? No, I wouldn't accept $10 million for property that you think is worth $100,000. Of course, you don't abrogate property rights. So the burden of proof is on someone who can prove to us the unprovable, that in this world where eminent domain is permitted, that you can somehow bring about such overwhelming, you can somehow avoid human catastrophe, and it's all ridiculous. Of course, I'm against eminent domain for precisely the same reason, grounded in what David feels we can conveniently ignore, the zero aggression principle. You don't take people's property. And the idea that you can give it to them with just come, that's crazy. There is no such thing. They don't want to sell you that property, period, full stop. Do something else with your life rather than take my property forcibly.
Well, that's good, to get that on the flow at least. But I mean, then Friedman can just show, well, actually, you accept the virtuous crime, so you don't, and then that can be used as a counter to this. So the virtuous crime, it really does undermine your case here for Gene. Again, none of this actually matters. Gene Epstein doesn't actually have to provide a great defense of the non-aggression principle. I mean, that is one way to attack this, because obviously he's saying that the non-aggression principle is flawed. But Gene Epstein doesn't actually have to defend the non-aggression principle. He can just come in and say, you have not disproven the non-aggression principle, because all you've done is show that I'm inconsistent, or that the audience is inconsistent. But that doesn't disprove the non-aggression principle. And then you can just go into attacking these other parts of the claim, that it starts off saying that there's a right way to do something, but Friedman doesn't think that there are right or wrong ways to do anything. Like he doesn't think that's a factual claim, right? He thinks that's just pure subjective whim. But then you can't prove that the right way to do something is this, because you don't think you can prove anything about the right way to do anything. That is the most fundamental problem with the resolution as stated.
Let me introduce another example, since, well, what else did David mention? The moral argument. Well, no, indeed, I agreed that ultimately I could say to somebody who doesn't care about aggression, to say, well, you won't have a logical defense if somebody aggresses against you. But of course, as I conceded, and as David pointed out, they can reject my idea. Well, might makes right. I don't give it. I'll just beat up anybody who tries to aggress. Of course, there are people in this world who simply will not be convinced about our belief in the zero aggression principle, and I'm certainly not enough of a philosopher to invoke all the fundamental reasons why I believe in it. I just think it's as natural as breathing, as some of the rest of you probably think. So indeed, if David wants to say, well, it's only as natural as breathing, you're just a shallow philosopher, David will be absolutely right. But the next part, war is an important issue, because, by the way, what do I hear all the time? Well, if we'd only stayed there for another 2 or 3 years, we finally would have won. We got out of Afghanistan after 20 years. Another 5 years, if we hadn't been so craven, we finally would have won. There's never enough war and killing for these people who have this religious faith. I don't know if I can convince them, but I can only tell them, and David apparently can't, that you're going to kill more people. And don't.
I mean, I really do think that David Friedman needs to, because I mean, Gene Epstein's here saying that he's he's not big on the philosophy. So I mean, that kind of speaks to why he wasn't necessarily digging in on some of these problems I was pointing out. Fine enough, not everybody has to be a philosopher. But I would like to see David Friedman going up against an actual philosopher. Maybe I should email him or something, because I think this is, we really need to have a proper defense of the non-aggression principle here. I mean, I would even accept just this exact same resolution. I might do that after the stream, in fact, because it's very problematic what Friedman is arguing for here. It really completely undermines itself, and I don't think Gene is necessarily attacking it as fully as he could. I think I think he can go a lot deeper in the attack. Right? He's kind of just building up an attempt to defend his zero aggression principle, but that isn't actually required by the resolution. The resolution requires that the negative is attacking that there can be this right, that there is this right way of persuading people of libertarianism, and it's showing them that the outcomes are superior by their standards. There are so many problems in that based upon Friedman's defense of it. Friedman has completely undermined his theory. Why is someone that isn't big on philosophy debating philosophy? I don't know. I mean, Friedman also isn't very big on philosophy, it doesn't seem like. I suppose they're on an equal footing.
Don't you think the burden of proof is on you? And that is a burden you cannot sustain because we've had 20 years of killing or 10 years of killing and we haven't gotten anywhere? So again, we can't leave home without it, precisely because of David's point. We can only marshal our data, all of it necessary, all of it important. I'm not a philosopher. I was economics columnist at Barron's for 26 years. I was trained in economics and in the Austrian school, which I think is more worthwhile because, again, my namesake, Richard Epstein, will talk about, well, the government can always give somebody with eminent domain the right amount of money. I don't know, maybe, I don't know if Milton felt that way. I never asked him about eminent domain, but certainly maybe he would have said that, but that's ridiculous from an Austrian standpoint. All value is subjective. Doesn't want to sell, he doesn't want to sell. No price is.
I think he's getting too hung up on the eminent domain point, because really David's argument was, well, really, if you're being consistent, then you should agree with eminent domain, right? Which is funny that he would say I should. But then explaining over and over and over again, just from a debate strategy perspective, this is explaining over and over and over again that, oh no, I disagree with eminent domain. That's, he's kind of just biting on some bait. But it doesn't actually advance him in the flow at all. This is a complete misstep, in my view. This does not give Gene any room forward in this debate. It just kind of, well, I don't agree with eminent domain, but the debate isn't over. Where does Gene Epstein agree with eminent domain? The debate is over whether the right way to persuade people of libertarianism is by showing them that the outcomes are superior by their standards rather than talking about the non-aggression principle. That's what the debate is over. So shooting down this point, all that does, because David Friedman can very openly just say, yeah, I agree that you disagree with eminent domain, but that shows an inconsistency because you really should agree with eminent domain, and we've gotten nowhere closer to attacking Friedman's more fundamental problems here. So I think this is a mistake for him to be focusing so much on this point.
Is good enough. I guess I want to end on my best moment with Milton. Milton was inveighing against the...
Okay, again, that's not going to advance him, reminiscing about Milton Friedman.
War on drugs, and indeed, he was talking consequentially. He mentioned a point about crime in the poor quarters of the country because of the war on drugs, and I said, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I said to him, and Milton said to me, if you don't know that, you really are very ignorant. And that was my favorite moment with Milton. We all are very ignorant of the world. We all have to cope with the facts of the world in an ignorant way, just like David has to. We can only marshal our arguments. We can never prove things in this world. We need the zero aggression.
We can never prove things in this world. Okay, if he advances this very strongly, he says, what he needs to follow that up with is he should say, we can never prove things in this world. Therefore, David cannot prove that the right way to do this is blah, 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 blah. That would gain him some ground in the debate. I would not like that tactic very much at all, because it seeds the wider ground that you can't prove anything. There are no absolutes. That's very terrible. But it would gain him some ground. So he needs to say, you can't prove anything in this world. So therefore, David can't prove his claim here. There are counters to that, of course, because it's like, can you prove that you can't prove anything in this world? It's like, is it absolutely true that there are no absolutes? Do you know with certainty that there is no certainty? These are kind of self-defeating positions, but at least would get him some ground.
We can never prove things in this world. We need the zero aggression principle to recognize where the burden of proof lies. And it's in all of these cases, the other side cannot bear that burden. Thanks.
I am not massively impressed so far. I'm just going to go to the toilet and fill up again. We've had another hour on the debate. Seems like we're going to be going into audience questions at this point. I would really like some amount of back and forth. Hopefully they have some amount of back and forth on the questions portion. But yeah, I'm not massively impressed with the arguments so far. But yeah, I'll be back in like another 5 minutes or something. There we go. Hello. So it looks like we've got a $5 donation from Evangelion enthusiast. Thank you very much. If I had ever seen his arguments for anarcho-capitalism, I would never have become an ANCAP. Oh, hold on, it's cutting off for me. There we go. If I had ever seen his arguments for anarcho-capitalism, I would have never become an ANCAP. He so clearly has no standards and no consistency. Yeah, he's kind of the Ayn Rand caricature of an anarchist, but open and honest about it. It's very strange. Pardon me. You very clearly need some sort of objective standard of law for you to even have any of these questions in the first place. But it's all stolen concepts for David Friedman, which puts him in a very precarious position.
We will now be going over to the question and answer. I'd like people to be having questions for both the affirmative and the negative, one at a time, and I'll be transferring, but I will take the moderator's prerogative. And I will ask the first questions. The question I have for the affirmative. There is, David, the socialist calculation problem. There's also the consequentialist calculation problem, that the number of outcomes of any particular action are actually infinite. They are primary and secondary and tertiary and out ad infinitum. And that for each possible action, there would be values that would be placed by each and every individual, each person living and people living in the future that we would have to calculate. And then eventually, once we get infinity by infinity, we would then have to combine these all into a single consequence and say, therefore we go and don't go. Don't we need some sort of bedrock if our goal isn't just to employ economics professors?
I mean, that is a true argument against consequentialists, but I don't even think that. I think Friedman's problem is even more fundamental than that, because he doesn't even necessarily like. I suppose he can't even necessarily be a consequentialist from the get-go. But yeah, the more fundamental problem is he's being like, parasitic, and he can't even say that therefore we should do this, because he doesn't think you can have a therefore we should do X, Y, Z. So even if he did solve this problem, he's still in the bind, because he can't say and therefore we should do blah 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 blah, because he doesn't think there could be factual shoulds.
If your argument is that the consequences, sorry, is this on? If your argument is that the consequences of acts are not knowable for certain, that's true. But if you really believe that that prevents reaching conclusions, I don't know how you take any actions at all. You don't even know whether feeding Ron Paul, who I was hoping was actually going to be moderating because he's much handsomer than Dennis. For all you know, the result of feeding Ron Paul is that he will get sufficient energy to bite somebody and kill them. You can't be sure it isn't true, but in the real...
Yeah, that's the problem with, having no proper epistemology being presented on stage, is that, well, we can't know anything with certainty, and then we have nothing. But then if Friedman swallows that pill, well, then he can't know the resolution with certainty. He can't know this. He isn't certain about his resolution. So what is the status of this resolution? Is it probable? Well, you can't have only probability. David Hume, apparently Friedman's big guy, he wants to keep going back to. David Hume pointed this out, that you can't have just probability, because then you get probabilities of probabilities, and you get probabilities of probabilities of probabilities, so on ad infinitum. You need certainty to have probability. Because let's say I think that it is 99% probable that this resolution is true. Okay, well, how probable is that? Well, it's 99% probable that it's 99% probable that this resolution is true. And you can just keep multiplying it by 0.99 multiplied by 0.99, so on and so forth. You have this infinite product, right? And it goes to zero. So you're actually not... You have no knowledge. You have no knowledge if all you have is probability. You can't even have probabilities if all you have is probabilities. You need certainty for there to be probable. You need to be certain that it is 99% probable. So you can't have only probabilities. So no certainty means, and Gene Epstein could point this out. He could say, well, if you have no certainty about anything, then you're not certain of the resolution. Ergo, you have not proven the resolution. And then Gene Epstein wins the debate.
Real world, the way we deal with individual choices and choices among societies we want, is by doing our best to figure out what will happen, knowing that we might be wrong. That's the world we live in.
I want to comment on David's answer. I sort of told you in advance. If somebody gives an answer to the question.
Speak into the microphone, please.
Sorry, yeah. Okay, I just want to remind you as moderator, as when I moderate, a question is asked of one person, the other person gets to comment. Now, of course, David is right that clearly, as we libertarians like to emphasize, most of life is not a libertarian problem. In most cases, entrepreneurs act on hunches. Entrepreneurs take risks. They have to deal with the facts as they know, as well as their creative.
The facts as they know. Yes, you need that certainty before you can do anything.
Notion about where the future lies. I'm restricting myself to the libertarian arguments which are narrowly focused on the predations of government or the predations of others. It's a narrow field. That's where the zero aggression principle becomes crucial and important. That's where it applies, but not to most of life, as I imagine most of you already know. Yeah.
So let me ask of the negative. Most people, upon hearing the non-aggression principle, would say, yes, that's very, very true. I kind of feel that, but there's really not really aggression. There's really not force. Most people will comply, and I am so concerned about this particular outcome.
What? Does most people comply with what? Is that what he said? Most people comply with the non-aggression principle?
Oh, yeah.
So let me ask of the negative. Most people, upon hearing the non-aggression principle, would say, yes, that's very, very true.
No, most people upon hearing the non-aggression principle would say, no, that's false. In fact, we've got one in chat right now, Herkgate, who says that the non-aggression principle is false.
I kind of feel that, but there's really not really aggression. There's really not
There really is aggression.
Force. Most people will comply, and I am so concerned about this particular outcome for this particular segment that I'm willing to go ahead and ignore the...
Well, there you go. So, most people will comply, don't worry about it, and I'm not going to comply. What? Who is this straw man that he's building?
The possible theoretical initiation of violence with in order to help this particular segment.
Well, absolutely. It is possible that even if I tell people who are quite prepared to put you and me in a cage for using certain substances, even if I tell them that you bear a very heavy burden of proof to show that it would be disastrous in this unknown world for there to be 90% for there to be full legalization of drugs, even if I tell them that and I can't convince them, then I guess I have to give up. I'm only talking about at least doing my best to offer them the right argument. If I want to tell Russ Roberts that as much as you weep for the people whose lives are meaningless, are you really going to impose government's solution to impose penalties on the rest of us, including poor people who want to buy what they want to buy from abroad? Are you really still...
I mean, I don't love that question, so I'm just going to skip past it. I don't think there's necessarily going to be anything interesting there, because I think the question was malformed.
This is for both.
Okay.
You can ask any question you want from anybody.
Is this on?
It's on.
Question is for both. Using the guy falling out of the building, grabbing onto the flagpole. Let's say somehow that flag causes serious property damage, let's say $10,000. Would you say that the person who fell then is liable for the repairs?
Sure. Yes.
Well, if you...
I mean, I wonder why David Friedman would say that he's liable, because he doesn't have any legal theory, because he's no non-aggression principle. What is his legal theory? Why is he liable?
Again, my point I want to stress is that all of these violations of the zero aggression principle, again, as I prefer to call it, zero is better than none, is that they're always and absolutely actionable. If I own the balcony and this incredible daredevil managed to save his life by grabbing the flagpole, I might just settle at $5,000 and absorb the rest, because I'd just be astonished by the story of what he did. But so therefore, the penalty and what actually happens in real life is a completely separate question. The violation is there, but indeed, certainly, if I were a different kind of person, I might say, well, $10,000 worth plus a fine. You owe me $11,000. You owe me $12,000. Very possibly, sure, that could be imposed. Yeah.
Gene, could you push that mic up so it's... Yeah, there. That's good. Next question.
This question is for the negative, and it might touch on what you were just saying a little bit.
Yeah.
And please do, either of you, correct me if any of my characterizations here are incorrect.
Sure.
In response to David's point related to the continuum problem of casting photons at someone without permission,
Oh, yeah.
you know, whether the megawatt laser or the match.
Yeah, again, we've gone over this. It's when it starts initiating a conflict. A single photon doesn't initiate a conflict unless it's like the world's most powerful fucking photon and it destroys your house. Right? It doesn't initiate a conflict otherwise.
Yeah, yeah.
You raised the existence of similar continuum problems such as handshake grip, and essentially said that we don't really have a problem resolving that, so this sort of problem is not insurmountable. But isn't the question not whether or not they are insurmountable, but insurmountable using the zero aggression principle as a basis? That is, how does the non-aggression principle or zero aggression
Yeah, I mean, this is a valid question. How do you deal with, you know, these continuum problems with just a pure NEP basis? I mean, I've demonstrated how you can do that in this stream, but I would be interested to see if Gene can handle it.
principle actually tell us what the proper grip is, or verify that such a grip was used, or communicate that information beforehand to either party? Don't our
Well, the non-aggression principle wouldn't be used to verify what grip had been used. That would just be standard investigation. That's the realm of epistemology.
methods of resolving those questions necessarily reduce to constructing answers on grounds that are at least partially consequentialist or reliant on external principles?
Well, that's a good question. There's no question that, in the examples I cited, that we face that problem right now in this society. Right now, again, a co-op will say, windows closed, doors closed, but there's secondhand smoke. So through some of my imagination, I say something to you that says that, whatever I might say, that's glancing.
I mean, we face that problem in this society, but then this side of the debate can just come back and be like, well, I mean, then the NEP doesn't solve for it, right? We're fine with having these continuums and these arbitrary standards, but you're trying to present some sort of objective standard, so you need to have the objective, cutoff point.
Whatever it might be, it's actionable. So therefore, there's no question that, or take the issue of murder. If you were involved in some causal way with the death of another person, it's always actionable. But society faces judgment calls in difficult cases having to do with, were you negligent in driving the truck that hit that person? If your tire went out and that person was accidentally hit, to what extent are you responsible? Well, the jury would have to look at to what extent did you have new tires? Society is constantly faced at the margin with difficult cases in establishing and applying every principle, including, in my example, the example of murder. So therefore, I would say that, again, in applying the zero aggression principle, just as in the case of murder or assault or any of those other cases, the light or the rest of it, that we face these problems all the time, but we don't say, well, the absolute rule against murder is absolute. However, we do have to recognize the problems in applying it in difficult cases. Intent, first degree murder, all of those problems come up all the time, but we don't repudiate the absolute rule against so many of these cases, as in the case of assault, murder, or in the case of the light or the beam. You have to apply your reasonable standards of society to these principles. So if your point is does the zero aggression principle inform your judgment? Well, it does inform your judgment in that clearly you recognize that there's a potential for aggression here. But admittedly, as in the case of murder or all the rest of it, your judgment has to be informed by the norms of society and by what people regard as sane and sensible. That's the best.
I mean, in a sense, he's kind of getting at the similar thing where it's, you need the judge to step in, but of course using the inviolable principles to apply to this case.
Answer I can get. I don't see that we repudiate the zero aggression principle because of these difficult cases any more than we repudiate all the other cases that arise in society today.
Let me comment on that, because in fact, in Machinery of Freedom, I follow that point with a chapter on economic analysis of law. And the economic analysis of law, which is the central part of economics that I've been doing in recent decades, is an attempt to figure out what the rules ought to be if what you
ought to be. Whoops.
Want to do is to maximize economic efficiency.
No, if that's just what you want it to be, he has no proof that this is not what ought to be means.
I don't think we have a good way of knowing how to maximize individual liberty. That'd be a good thing if you could. But economic efficiency, which is some sort of a way, an imperfect way of adding up how well everybody is the best we've got at this point. And one can, in fact, use economics to analyze questions such as, what should the penalty for a crime be?
No. What should? Whoopsie-daisies. He rejects morality. He can't say what should the penalty be.
what counts as a crime and so forth.
What counts as a crime? Whoops. Don't have the non-aggression principle anymore. Can't say what counts as a crime.
You can't do anything like a perfect job of it because we don't have enough information. But if people are actually curious about how you would approach that problem, one of my other books is called Law's Order. You can read that on my webpage, like most of my things you can read on my webpage, and that sketches out how you would approach questions such as light bulb versus laser beam from the standpoint of economics.
Hello. The examples so far have focused on the consequence for the violation of the aggression principle, and I don't think we're looking for an abdication of responsibility. But I wondered about an example that looked more at the efficacy of the non-aggression principle in the argument. For example, I teach school, and there has certainly been a lot of coercion to get a vaccine lately, for which I will not comply, nor has my administration made me feel like I needed to, thankfully, though I was never in a position where I would have. But for many people, I've said to them, what are you willing to do to vaccinate me? Because you would have to pin me down and give it to me forcibly.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's, project out, well, what does that actually entail? You're going to have to use force against me. How much force are you willing to use? Really, none of these government edicts are innocuous. She's entirely correct there.
With me fighting the entire time. So what are you willing to do to force my compliance? And I wondered what would be your argument absent the non-aggression principle that would be as effective in that realm. Thank you.
I guess my basic argument would be that having institutions that let people coerce other people is much more likely to result in coercing them in ways that make the world worse than in ways.
I mean, do you see how she was having all this passion? It's like, you'd have to hold me down, and whilst I'm fighting you off, and you'd have to hold me down and stick me in the arm. So much more visceral, Like, you can see that in your head. But and then David Friedman comes in, well, having these institutions where people are like, bored, who cares, right? Nobody's listening to that. That doesn't have any rhetorical weight.
Ways that make the world better. That if we could have a government that is a dictatorship by a perfectly wise, benevolent despot, what I like to refer to as a bureaucrat god, who knew everything.
I live in your utopia, but how do we convince them?
That in that world, indeed, you could improve on the outcomes of freedom. That in that world, the perfectly wise, benevolent despot could realize that you would be better off with getting vaccinated, and would, take some convenient occasion to put you unconscious and vaccinate you, and maybe not even tell you, because why upset you about it? But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where all of the decisions are being made by human beings. The human beings are making them not only with imperfect information, but with the wrong incentives. That each human being has an incentive to serve his own interests and those of people he cares about. The nice thing about the market is that it's a way of getting socially desirable outcomes out of individual selfishness. The political market does.
Again, socially desirable by their standards. Again, everything he goes into here, it's got all these same problems that I've been hitting over and over and over again. I mean, if anybody's watched this, are there any interesting questions we could skip to? Because it seems like we're going over the same sort of ground here. We've really had the debate already. I don't see any new ground being tread here. I doubt that there's anything new to be had. We've been live for 2.5 hours now. Thank you very much to everybody who stopped by. Thank you especially to the people who donated. It's always very appreciated. I'll see you next time. I don't know. I may be doing a stream over the weekend on the Patrick Bet David surrounded interview on Jubilee. That should be pretty fun. I'll see you guys later. Bye.